The following program is being brought to you by Reign of Fire Radio, a media outreach arm of Reign of Fire Evangelical Ministries. Our commitment is to sponsor programs that will assist in living a Christian life and win others through teaching the finished work of Jesus Christ. Welcome to Delivered or Deceived with your host, Rand Berkey. Rand is a former cult member who now educates people on the dangers of these types of groups, as well as people who would seek to exploit and terrorize others. Rand has devoted his life to providing assistance to those who have been hurt. No one wants to be led through the wilderness by a guide who has never been there. He has, and his desire is that you will find yourself delivered and not deceived.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Reign of Fire Christian Radio. As is on every broadcast, I'd like to open the scripture with the scripture that is one of the foundation scriptures of Reign of Fire Evangelical Ministries as Reign of Fire Christian Radio. As on every broadcast, I like to set the stage. And in Luke 4:17 through 19 it states, "And Jesus was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he opened the book, he found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord.'" Christ is the message, and I'm only one of the bearers of the message. Well, good evening. And I've been reading from my book, Delivered from Deception. And chapter 10, we talked about being at the headquarters, which I call Jerusalem. Me and my wife, Rose, which, by the way, I have changed the name to protect the innocent and protect me from the guilty, so to speak. Anyway, so chapter 11, DIVORCE, the more abundant life. And it states, either a husband or wife decides to break the marriage commitments, they both release themselves from the WACOR household. And this was the WACOR policies and procedures. So we go from chapter 10 to, of course, chapter 11, and I'm jumping into it right now. As spring turned into summer, the marriage continued to unravel, despite my efforts to keep it intact. Rose would ask questions like, "If we were to get a divorce, what things would you want?" I continued to tell her this was not going to happen. I prayed and prayed that a miracle would happen. During one of these conversations, she unloaded a bombshell on me, a secret she had kept all of these years. She told me that she had never loved me. I looked at her with disbelief, in shock. I asked her why then had she married me to begin with. Her second statement was as mind-boggling as the first. She said she had made a mistake. She had believed that God had told her to marry me, but she was wrong. I was speechless. I had spent the last 5.5 years of my life beating my head against a wall which should have never have been there. I could not even grasp that what she stated was true. Despite this revelation, I still believed God could perform a miracle and still save the marriage. I told Rose I would do anything to make the marriage work. She looked at me and told me she would not. She told me if I wanted to save the marriage, God was going to have to reveal what needed to be done, because she would not. I spent hours and hours in prayer, searching for answers. I would be up half the night, wandering the grounds, asking God for answers. But they did not come. Rose started to sleep on top of the covers of the bed, telling me she did not want me to rape her. I could not believe what I was hearing. I never lifted a finger to her in anger or frustration, and she could even think this of me. I was exasperated. I was not the only one having problems. Jack had been seeing a woman who worked on staff. Actually, Jack had been seeing a few women at the headquarters. This particular romance had seemed to be getting serious. Jack had decided to break it off because he still had 1 year left in training. He did not know what the future would hold. The woman, who was clergy, was very upset. Jack had tried to explain to her his reasons for breaking off the relationship, but she did not accept the rationale, and she was angry. She could do nothing to change his mind. One day I saw Jack sitting on the back door steps of his trailer, holding his head in his hands, and I went to talk to him. As we talked, he told me how despondent he was over the situation. I asked him directly if he had an intimate relationship with her. He replied that he had. My next question was if he had done this, and the love of God in the renewed mind. Okay, so the way taught that the Ten Commandments did not really apply to us. They were only for our learning. Because of the way the Bible was interpreted, by the way, it was believed that the commandments were written to and for the Jews only. Jesus came to fulfill all the law and prophecies of the Old Testament. Having done so, we no longer needed to live under them. The new law was the law of love. As long as you were doing things out of the love of God, anything was permissible. Living in the love of God, you would not do anything selfish, of course. This is why I asked him if he had made love to her with this attitude. My reasoning was if he had made love to her in this way, then everything should work out. His answer that he had honestly thought he had. We sat there a while in silence, and then I left him alone to think. I really couldn't think of anything more to say to him, and besides, I was hardly the one to give him advice on relationships when my marriage was in shambles. It was about a week before the rock, and I was called to Fort's office. As I entered the room, I saw Rose seated in a chair. He asked me to sit down, and then told me Rose had decided she wanted a divorce. He told me we were relieved of all our core responsibilities, and we would have to move out of the trailer and go elsewhere off the grounds. Her brother and wife lived in New Knoxville, and she would be moving in with them until after the end of the rock. Once again, I was stunned. What I had been working towards for the last 5 years had vanished before my eyes in an instant. Rose left, and I sat there in the front of Fort motionless. I asked him if I could at least finish out the rest of the year in the finishing department. I told him God had placed me there to do the job. I felt it was my obligation to finish my responsibility. Fort told me he would see what he could do, thinking it was possible, but I still had to move out of the trailer and find my own housing. I went back to work and told Kurt what had happened. Though sympathetic, he could do nothing or say anything that would console me. I asked him to help me move my things out of storage and off grounds. He offered to keep them at his place until after the rock. I felt like a leper, since I had been asked to leave the Way Corps, and some people were starting to treat me like I was one as well. I was not surprised, though. I had seen this played out with others who had been in the same dilemma. I arranged housing for the duration, but after one day it fell through. I ended up borrowing a tent and living in the woods on the Way's campgrounds for the next 3 weeks. Because I got special permission to stay, I was not allowed to tell anyone that I had been staying on grounds. I was given a pass for my meals during the Corps week and the rock, and I told I could shower in the Outreach Service Center. I was so thankful that they were so kind to me and they went out of their way to help me. Yeah, right, folks? During this time, Rose had retained a lawyer. She said he could do all the paperwork in order for us to get an uncontested divorce. I did not have enough money to retain a lawyer for myself, and at this point, so I finally threw in the towel. I went along with her and paid half of the fee for the file papers. I would have to appear in court with her after 30 days to finalize everything. After we went to the lawyer, I took off my ring and pawned it for $20. I went back to work with a feeling of resignation. I did not want to dwell on it too much, so I busied myself with work. It was awkward being on the grounds and seeing the people I had been in the Corps with. They would ask me what was going on and where I was going the next year. What was I to tell them? I did not even have a clue of where I would be living in the next couple of weeks. I tried to ask for advice from the Corps leadership, but they were being very unhelpful. I asked what I needed to do in order to re-enter the Corps program. They did not give me a clear answer. Failure in a person's life is an embarrassment to the way, because we're supposed to have lives that were problem-free and successful. Problems were ignored and swept under the rug, so the way could show to the world that all their followers had led a happy, carefree life. This was the purpose of Power for Abundant Living, the PFAL class. Any failure was because of the person, not because there was something wrong with the group or their ideology. The travesty of the ways covering up problems came close to home during this time. Throughout the years, Rose and I kept in touch with Mona and Donna. They had gone out as WOWs 2 different times. The first time they were asked to leave the field. The next time out, they had completed their year and had stayed in the area where they had been assigned. While I was working, Donna came to see me. I gave her a big hug when I saw her. I was so glad to see a friendly person who would not treat me as an outcast. She didn't seem to be herself, though, so I prodded her to tell me what was going on. She finally told me, on the condition I would not tell her mother. I promised and said it was okay to tell me. Well, Mona had been engaged to get married to the man who was her twig leader, but had decided against it. She and Donna had decided to go WOW again. Donna was about 16 at this time. Going out as a WOW excited Donna because she really liked the WOW program. One night, after her mother's breakup with the fiancé, he came over to Mona's place. Donna happened to be there by herself. The man raped Donna. This man was also going out as a WOW. The reason why Donna did not want anyone to find out because she was afraid she would not be allowed to go out as a WOW. She somehow blamed herself. I told her it was important to notify leadership about this man so he would not victimize any other woman or child and that he could get help. I told her I would get in contact with the WOW leader for the United States so she could tell him what happened. I told her to come by the next day so I could tell her when the meeting was scheduled. After Donna left, I made phone calls until I located him. I told him where there was a WOW who needed to talk with him. The next day, Donna came to where I was working, and I told her we were going to see the WOW coordinator. We met with him, and I introduced her. I stood off to the side while they spoke in private. When they were finished, they both came over to me. Bob thanked me for bringing this to his attention and said he would look into the situation. Donna was happy because he had given his word he would not tell her mother and said that there was no problem with her and Mona going out as wives. After he left,